Hello, welcome to this session. I'm delighted to see there isn't, as far as I can see, a single spare seat, standing room only, which is always a good sign that we've got a hot topic. The subject is Ireland, potential, ambition and delivery. I'm delighted to be chairing this as, despite the fact that I'm chair of the UK body, the Anaerobic Digestion and Bioresources Association, we have a corner interest in Northern Ireland, and obviously the Northern Irish topography lends itself substantially to AD, as does the topography in the Republic. And a commission study recently, which we were just discussing in Brussels, identified Ireland as being the country with the most potential for anaerobic digestion because of unused feedstocks. Anybody who knows Ireland, I think, will know that that's got to be true, particularly since I now see that there is serious attention being paid to using grass as a feedstock, and if there's one thing there's a lot of in Ireland, it's grass. So what I'd like to do is kick over to our two presenters. I've been asked to give apologies for Yvette Jones, who I'm afraid has been taken ill and was unable to get here. So apologies for that. But our two remaining speakers will valiantly fill the gap by covering the ground that she might have covered, and I will be trying to, as a good chair, stir up as much controversy and heat as I possibly can between these two, and obviously open up to questions from you as well. So could I perhaps first turn to Andrea Munoz Garcia, who's the lead on Ireland at the NNFCC. And Andrea's going to give us an overview of biogas and biomethane of the sector in Ireland, including current and planned deployment. Andrea.
So, good afternoon, everybody. As Chris says, my name is Andrea. I work for NNFCC, the Bioeconomy Consultants, and I'm going to be talking today about AD deployment in the Republic of Ireland. So, just a quick introduction about NNFCC for those who don't know us yet. So, we're a specialist business consultancy with 20 years of expertise in the bioeconomy, and we cover topics biofuels, biobase, biorefinery, and of course, bioenergy. We provide advice to our customers, and we evaluate, analyze the data to de-risk the bioeconomy for them. We basically provide the clients with an overview of market, feedstock, technology, so they can take informed business decisions. So moving on to today's topic, bioeconomy in Ireland. The AD sector in Ireland is at a very early stage of development. So NNFCC has been monitoring the market for a while now, and we've put together a report about our AD deployment in the Republic of Ireland. The report contains an overview of the policy both in Ireland and at a European level, the incentives that are available, current installed capacity, any upcoming capacity that we are aware of, and also the feedstock use. We update the database, so the report is based in a database that we update every month, and we're obviously any data that you might have and you want to discuss with us, that's welcomed. And the report is available in our website if you're interested, and we have a hard copy in the stand if you want to have a look. So at the moment in Ireland, there are 30 operational AD plants. Some of them are wastewater treatment plants. We know of 3 projects that might be coming up in the next few years, and the growth has been quite slow, with only 11 plants since 2017. Just to put this in context, in the UK there is over 600 operational plants at the moment. So yeah, the difference is quite significant. In terms of biomethane, there is actually 2 plants now producing biomethane. Both of them are injecting into the gas grid. Injection happens through a central injection point. Our colleague from Gas Network Ireland was going to be talking a little bit about the injection points. Basically, one of the injection points, the operational one, is located in Cosh in County Kildare. There is another injection point planned with larger capacity than the existing one to be built in the next period. In terms of capacity and feedstock and plant size, I'm just going to give some numbers. Full data is available in the report, just going to give an overview. At the moment, total capacity would be in the range of thousands kilowatts electric, and yeah, you can find the specific numbers in the report. In terms of the scale, the majority of plants would be medium scale, as you can see by the green bars in the graph. So that means they would have a capacity of between 250 and 500 kilowatt electric. However, most of the capacity is given by a few larger scale plants with a capacity of over 500 kilowatt electric. In terms of feedstock, most of the plants are waste fed, and most of the capacity comes from waste fed plants. Just as to put the kind of the value in context, the EPA showed that in 2020, 310 kilotons of Irish waste was processed through AD, and an equivalent amount through composting. So as I said, the report covers policy and the policy framework in Ireland. So here I'm just showing the Irish overview of policy. On the top, you can see key policy documents in green. At the bottom, some of key targets, both of GHG emissions and biomethane. So initially, Ireland set up a target of 1.6 terawatt hour by 2030, but that was actually increased last summer to 5.7 terawatt hour. That's quite a leap from the current capacity. So reaching that target will be challenging. That's the one highlighted there. In terms of key policy documents, the climate action plans, for example, are worth mentioning. They set up a list of actions to try to work towards these targets. They are updated every year. The last version of it was released in December, and it has specific actions related to biomethane, and there is a mention of incentivizing biomethane production to decarbonize the agri-sector. In terms of incentives, there is nothing specific for biogas or biomethane production, but there are some incentives for renewable energy production. In the heat sector is the support scheme for renewable heat that started operating in 2019, at the end of 2019, and it provides support both as a capital support or operational support. But for AD systems, AD heating system would be operational support in the form of quarterly tariffs for 15 years. It has been said that there will be a renewable heat obligation introduced at some point in 2024. In the electricity, for example, we have the renewable energy support scheme, but that tends to be more focused on solar and wind at present. And in the transport sector is the biofuel obligation scheme. So just to kind of sum up what I've been talking about, is the main message is the sector is at a very early stage of development. However, there is a lot of excitement, there is a lot of interest. Many developers are interested in going to Ireland. Again, Gas Network Ireland was going to talk about this. They ran a request for information at the end of last year, and they got loads of interest from developers. I think they released some initial data saying that all the interest that has been shown by developers so far would help reach the target twice, the target set. So the interest is big. It's just at the moment not much has happened yet. And yeah, the report NNFCC has been monitoring the market. We're going to continue to do so. We're hoping to keep producing this report next year. If you're interested in the report, come and talk to us at the stand A302. You can see the hard copy. You can also buy this in our website. And just just to go over the numbers again, capacity would be in the thousands kilowatt hour range, and the typical plant scale would be between 250 kilowatt hour, but most of the capacity would come from larger plants, and most of the plants at present are waste fed. And we are hoping that the ambitious targets that are set, not only in Ireland but also in the EU through the Repower EU, kind of act as a driver of the sector, and also the new renewable heat obligation coming up also help driving the sector. And that's me, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And Sean, if I could ask you to do your presentation, and then we'll kick open to questions. So that's Sean Finnan, who's the CEO of the Irish Bioenergy Association, and Sean is ideally placed to give us a perspective on where the sector is, where it could go, and what the government needs to do to make sure it does.
Yep. Thanks very much, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As Chris said, my name is Sean Finnan. I'm the CEO of the Irish Bioenergy Association, and we're delighted to get the invitation to present to you today. So just a small bit of information about our association. So we're the representative body in Ireland for the bioenergy sector. So our association covers solid biomass, biogas, biomethane, biofuels, energy crops, wood fuels, and a new focus in terms of the biochar sector, which is showing some promise in Ireland. So our main role is as a representative body, lobbying, advocacy, informing various different stakeholders about the sector, and also ensuring that the sector gets the support that it requires in order for it to grow and develop. Our membership is broad and diverse, spread across all the different sectors, and we also are involved in a number of research development and demonstration projects. We have one on biogas, farm-scale biogas. We have one on biochar, and we also roll out a wood fuel quality assurance scheme in line with the newly introduced solid fuel regulations, which were introduced late last year in Ireland. If you'd like to check out further about our association, feel free to visit our website, www.erbia.org. So just in our work in the biogas/biomethane area, we divide our work into two very distinct scales. So we look at farm-based biogas plants, and we look at medium to large scale biomethane plants. And the reason we do this is because what we're finding when we engage with farmers, stakeholders, there's a lot of confusion out there about the different scales that are possible and the actual requirements of each, from a regulatory perspective, from a feedstock perspective, and from a support perspective. So for us, the farm-based biogas plants are obviously dependent on the farm size in terms of the size of them, but you'll see the asterisk at the bottom. Really the size is determined by the animal byproducts regulations, which we have to abide by as an industry in Ireland. So type 9 is our farm-based plant, and that doesn't allow for the import of any feedstock, because that would require pasteurization of the output, and that's not economically viable at the scale we're talking about here. Whereas at a medium to large scale, it really depends on the feedstock available, and that determines the size of your facility, and it's a different animal byproducts regime. Location of a farm-based plant is on site, on farm. It complements existing farm enterprise, so it's using its own feedstocks, and it's usually utilizing the energy on the farm or in the vicinity of the farm. Whereas medium to large scale generally are centrally located plants. Some of those which Andrea has referred to are medium to large scale plants, and they're taking feedstock from a variety of sources and a variety of different enterprises. The farmer's role is very distinctly different in both. We see the farmer's role in a farm scale plant is to provide the feedstock, operate the plant with expertise from their technology provider assisting them. But the opportunity for farmers in terms of medium to large scale is in actually providing feedstock through a contract or mobilized by a co-op. Feedstocks in are different. They're broader, different types of feedstocks in the medium to large scale than the agricultural farm-based plants. The energy output then is satisfying non-farm energy demand in the vicinity, whereas medium to large scale plants generally sell their energy output to either a grid or a network, be the gas grid or the electricity network, which is currently the case in Ireland with the existing plants. It's all mostly CHP plants, apart from the 2 biomethane plants. And then the support requirements are completely different. For a farm scale, we believe that a capital grant is required to offset the initial capital investment with the return on investment achieved by the displacement of a fossil fuel bill. Whereas in a medium to large scale plant, we believe that an ongoing operational support is required, and it's the medium to large scale which will be the focus of my presentation here today. But just to go back on the farm scale, we are rolling out a European Innovation Partnership project where we have a capital support grant from government to build 3 biogas plants on 3 farms in 2023. So we're administering the grant on behalf of the government, and what we hope to achieve through that project is to demonstrate what level of capital is required to make this scale viable on farm. The government has set aside 12 million euros of a support for farm scale, but they haven't a plan in terms of how they mobilise that. So that's just to summarise where our perspective in terms of the different size and potential which exists in Ireland. Moving on, I was asked to discuss or to highlight today the key considerations from an industry perspective in terms of mobilising the sector. So these are some of the key considerations that are required, and maybe more principal points as to how we set about introducing or developing an industry. So the role for all scales of biogas, biomethane, there's potential for all scales. I think that's a key point. The second is that we believe a medium to large scale industry should be mobilised on a phased basis. And this is to get political buy-in from people that might have reservations about developing the sector. If we do it on a phased basis, you can learn from each phase and you can expand and you can develop as you go. Farmer engagement is crucial. It's an agri-based model that's been discussed in Ireland. So everyone along the supply chain has to benefit in order for that farmer engagement to be maintained and that relationship to be built. So farmers need to be paid for their feedstocks, or else we won't have an industry. We need to complement rather than compete with existing mainstream food production. Ireland is a food nation. Our agricultural policy is about food generation, and that needs to remain, and that's the view of the farm representative bodies. However, there is a recognition that there is a need for a biogas industry to complement that food production, to decarbonise that food production, and to offer opportunities to farmers who potentially might want to diversify their enterprises. We need to spread the plants well from a geographical perspective. We saw the map there. They're currently fairly well spread out, but there's lots of areas where there's no facilities which could have facilities. We need to use reliable, proven, certified and tested technology. We need to learn from experiences in other jurisdictions about technology and use technology that's already proven. We need clarity around the planning process and planning guidelines. And what we're noticing is that each county has different requirements in terms of planning permissions. And as a result, that causes confusion, it causes frustration, and we need clarity and a common approach in terms of planning and planning these facilities. And linked with that, we need to improve knowledge, information and understanding at all levels. That's not alone with planners, but that's with farmers, that's with energy users, that's with stakeholders. All across the board, information, knowledge and understanding is very important. In order for the sector to grow, appropriate community engagement is required. If you don't engage with your community, you will have problems getting your planning permissions, and you still might have problems getting your planning permissions. However, there's more of a likelihood that you will succeed if you have proper community engagement, and that's very important. And finally, we need to utilise the gas grid as a national resource. So Yvette, I was following her today. She would have presented before me. On her slides, she would have shown you the gas grid. So the gas grid covers large swathes of the country, and there is a plan from Gas Networks Ireland to build injection points where the necessity rises in terms of facilities. But we need to utilise the gas grid as a resource. There is a lot of discussion about the gas grid, and there's a lot of ideology being talked about at a political level about the gas grid as well. But we fundamentally believe that the gas grid as a national resource should be decarbonised via using biomethane. So what are the benefits to agriculture? So grass and manure plants, as Chris referred to, are going to be the focus. In our opinion, they should be set up initially in less intensively farmed areas where there is less competition for grass feedstocks. Now, and as a result, that grass feedstocks should come from increased production, so more efficiency at farm level, better soil fertility using digestate. So that efficiency that could be achieved at a farm level, like the average farm is only growing between 7 and 8 tons of dry matter per year. There's farms that have the potential to grow twice that. So that increased production could potentially be achieved, and that could be the feedstock that could fuel the biogas biomethane industry. It's an alternative income stream for farmers. We can assist farmers in times of a fodder shortage by having a buffer of feedstocks available in the form of silage, that if there's a fodder shortages are usually short-lived, and once you have that feedstock, you can give it back to farmers when they need it, and you can take it back in when the weather changes or the situation arises that means that the fodder can be replenished. The existing cooperative model needs to be utilised to mobilise feedstocks. There's no point in reinventing the wheel. We have a very strong cooperative model in Ireland, and that needs to be utilised. And then finally, digestate needs to be promoted as part of an agricultural circular economy with the potential to reduce chemical fertiliser usage. So what are the key industry requirements to mobilise the sector? One, I'll discuss with you or briefly outline the opportunity and the context. Two, I'm going to discuss very briefly about the policy and supports that we feel are required. Three, I'm going to go through about some regulatory and planning issues. And then four, some general feedback in terms of supply chain challenges and opportunities. So I have a slide on each. So what's the opportunity and context? So we have a climate action plan, as Andrea said. That shows huge ambition across all sectors to decarbonise. So that presents an opportunity. Biomethane and biogas can assist with that decarbonisation. We have a dispatchable energy. We feel as if that's not supported in current support regimes. Andrea would have mentioned about the Renewable Electricity Support Scheme. It places no value in the auction system on dispatchability. As a result, it says it's technology neutral, but we can't compete because we can't compete with wind and solar from a cost perspective because we have an ongoing feeding requirement for the industry. But we do produce dispatchable energy, so that needs to be valued as we move towards more intermittent renewable energy coming onto our systems. There's a 25% emissions reduction target for agriculture, and if you look at all the proposals taking into account forestry, biomethane, organic farming, that presents a 10% shift in land use to achieve all the targets which are there, which is significant in Ireland. And the overall target for emissions reduction is 25%. And it is seen that biomethane has a strong part to play in that by potentially diversifying farming and encouraging people to produce feedstocks, maybe and reduce their animal numbers. Maybe not get rid of all their animals, but reduce their animal numbers. And then there's a tightening of the nitrates regulation requirements, and the AD industry offers an opportunity to assist with the nitrates from the point of view of offering an outlet for slurry to reduce that nitrogen loading on farms and produce a biofertilizer from that and produce biogas from it and biomethane. And then that's the final point. Biogas, we have the option of an alternative fertilizer in the form of digestate, and there's also the land use implications in terms of a grass and slurry based system. So what are the policy and support requirements? So to deliver on this 5.7 terawatt government target by 2030, there needs to be a plan. And unfortunately, there is no government plan to deliver this target, or indeed there was no government plan to deliver the initial, that should be 1.6 rather than 1.8 terawatt hour target. But we are actively engaging as a representative body on behalf of our members. Our members are the biogas plant developers, the technology providers, and some of the energy users, and indeed some of the feedstock suppliers. So we're engaging on behalf of our members to try and steer the development of that strategy or assist with the development of that strategy by providing information, providing knowledge, providing figures, all of that type of stuff that a renewable energy representative body should be doing. So we believe and understand that the government biomethane strategy will be developed over the next 6 months with the view to having something published by the end of the year. And we're waiting and ready to assist in that and to provide feedback and input. There is talks about a renewable heat obligation, but it remains unclear and unknown whether this will be enough to encourage investment. If it does show a level of ambition, then it potentially can be one of the mechanisms by which an industry can be developed. However, we fundamentally believe that we need to talk about an ongoing operational support similar to what exists in other EU member countries and indeed in the UK, and how other countries are developing that further with contracts for difference and various other support mechanisms. And we fundamentally believe that that's what's required rather than obligation schemes and market-led supports. The RTFO, the BOSS is another example, Biofuel Obligation Scheme, has potential for the transport sector. However, we have a piece of regulation on the table at the moment from the Minister, which is supposed to be signed next week, which will actually disadvantage the biomethane sector. And I'm not going to go into the intricate details of that, but it just shows you how complex this area is. There's a lot of talk about capital support for medium to large scale. As an organisation and on behalf of our members, we believe that capital support isn't the way forward in lieu of an operational support. We believe that it needs to be an operational support, and a capital support model won't work. It needs to be a mixture of a number of mechanisms potentially. The other fundamental question is industry willing to pay for renewable gas? It will come at a higher cost than fossil gas. Are industry willing to pay for it? And that question has been asked but not probably been answered by industry. And then the final points on this is we have developed a policy paper around mobilising the sector, and we're currently updating that paper based on a new ambitious target. And key to that is that we've seen a huge increase in fossil gas prices. That certainly helps the economics, but how long will that last? We've seen feedstock costs increase, we've seen development costs increase, and they've all changed dramatically over the last number of years. So all those increases and changes have to be factored in to the new reality from the economic perspective. In terms of industry, regulatory and planning requirements, the replacement of chemical fertilizer with digestate is possible. However, it's a regulatory challenge. You're not displacing a like for like product, an organic product in the form of digestate with an inorganic chemical fertilizer. So there's some regulatory change required there in order for that direct replacement to be done. We have a very strong and clear animal byproducts regulation regime, which is a positive because it sets out the regulatory regime by which the industry has to operate. We need clarity on licensing requirements. I'm hearing stories from members that certain members have certain requirements, whereas others that operate plants have different requirements. So we need clarity on licensing requirements, and there's a huge administrative burden associated with licensing requirements from the EPA and others. So it's important that we have clarity on that, and we need clarity on that, and that needs to be centralized. We need political leadership because we have politicians going around stirring up anti-negative campaigns around potential plants that are being planning permission at the moment. So we need political leadership and there's a lot of misinformation out there about what they are and what they aren't. And that's been stoked and stirred up, and as a result that causes issues in communities where these facilities, we hope they will be built. And it means that some of the project proposals won't succeed. So we need political leadership to actually understand what this technology is, understand what it does, and for politicians to show leadership and demonstrate to the public that we need these facilities and they're not the big monsters that they are made out to be on occasion. We need clear guidance in terms of planning. Different counties have different approaches in terms of the planning process. So there needs to be clear guidance in terms of that. Some counties will ask you for very specific information. Others will ask you for more broader information, but there's no consistency. So the same developers proposing projects in different counties with completely different requirements from the planning authorities, and that causes confusion. So we need to bring some clarity to that as well. And also a distinction between the different scales. So the difference in a farm scale plant, which I spoke about at the start, and a medium to large scale plant, like their planning requirements and the requirements for their assessments and reports, they're completely different. But we have had experience where farm-based plants, which are no greater than slurry management tools in some cases, have the same requirements imposed upon them from a planning perspective as multi-megawatt biomethane facilities. So we need clarity and guidelines based on the different scales. And that goes to the final point. There is no knowledge or distinction between the different scales amongst the planning authorities, and that is a particular challenge. In terms of the supply chain is ready. The technology providers are available. We see them here today. They have built facilities right across Europe. There's lessons they've learned. So the technology is available. It's a mainstream technology. It's a technology that has been developed. And the capacity is there in terms of technology. I fundamentally believe that the feedstock mobilization, there are challenges associated with, but it won't be that those challenges won't be to the detriment of an industry. The feedstock will mobilize, farmers will engage, but we just need to ensure that it's not reinventing wheels in terms of how it's mobilized, using the co-op network and the like. However, there is some anxiety amongst farmers and their representatives about competition for feedstocks. So we need to allay those fears and come up with ways in which they can be, those fears can be and anxieties can be reduced. There's a huge level of interest from farmers, but there's a lack of information, in our opinion, and technical knowledge exists at all levels. It's our job as an association to roll out that information knowledge. It's also the role of the farming representative bodies and others. And in most cases, we feel as if biogas biomethane is spoken of very simplistically. While it is a simple technology, it is quite complex in that, you know, you have to feed the plant properly, you have to manage the plant properly, you have to maintain the plant properly, to operate the plant properly in order for it to reach its optimum. And then there is great potential for environmental and sustainability impact mitigation. And really, we feel as if biogas biomethane is the solution to a challenged farming sector in terms of emissions, in terms of sustainability and other areas. And then finally, the nutritional value of digestate, in our opinion, is underestimated as a biofertilizer. Leaving aside the regulatory challenges around the comparisons of chemical and digestate, there needs to be further research and development in the area of digestate and using it as a biofertilizer, and the benefits of using digestate ahead of raw slurry, for instance, and the availability of plant-based nutrients. And all of those areas, we need to see further work and exploration and research in that particular area. So they summarize the supply chain challenges and the opportunities. That concludes my presentation. I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions which you have. And if there is anyone that would like to speak one-to-one after about Ireland and the opportunities, I can speak with you now, or we're happy to engage with you further by email or by phone or by Zoom call or whatever is required. So thanks for the opportunity.
Well, thanks very much, Sean. That's a very good overview of the situation. Can I abuse the chairmanship by asking a couple of questions first? Have you thought about the potential implications at all of, which you have the advantage of and we don't in the UK any longer, of the extension of the emissions trading scheme and what it's likely to do to demand for biomethane?
It will provide opportunity, but I have to admit I'm probably not as well briefed on the changes as I should be at this point, and it's something we are currently considering and reviewing to see what potential impact it will have. So I don't have a concrete answer, but we do think there will be opportunity and potential as a result.
I remember sitting through a presentation in our Northern Ireland conference in Belfast from some senior person, KPMG Ireland, arguing that the sector didn't really need, admittedly the gas price was a little bit higher than it is today, it's come down since then, didn't really need any subsidy because with the gas price where it is, potentially digestate prices where they are, because after all synthetic fertilizer is made out of fossil gas largely, that should provide enough revenue streams. There may be a case, for example, for providing certainty going forwards through something like a contract for difference, but that actually you ought to be able to build plants and make money at current gas prices. You're looking skeptical.
Fundamentally, we don't agree. We believe that even with the price of gas at the moment, gas prices have dropped in recent weeks, there is still a need for some sort of a market mechanism or a support mechanism which reduces the risk for developers. And if you look at what the Irish government has done in terms of wind and solar, they've introduced an auction-based system where the developer bids in at a price, and they have that cushion from the point of view if the If the market price for electricity drops below that, they get a subvention or support from the government. And that allows certainty in terms of investment. It allows certainty to go and raise funds, and it helps the business case for the facility or for the farm or the development. And we need a similar mechanism, in our opinion, for the biomethane sector. I'm not saying necessarily it needs to be an auction-based system, but it needs to be some form of a system where you have that contract for difference, where you have that cushion that if the fossil gas price drops below a certain level, or below the level that you have bid in at, that you will get that your business won't be in jeopardy as a result of it. And the difference for biogas, biomethane, and the intermittent renewables is the intermittent renewables rely on the wind and the solar, or the sun and the light. So they don't have an ongoing feeding requirement. And I sometimes feel as if that's not acknowledged or within political circles and official circles in terms of the requirement for a support. You have that ongoing feeding requirement. And if you're relying on the fossil gas price, and if that's your only mechanism by which you fund your facility, which would be difficult, what happens if the fossil gas price drops to the floor and your feedstock costs are way high and your production costs are way high? You're gone out of business. So there needs to be some inbuilt mechanism which gives that market certainty. When you go to get funding, you can demonstrate to your funder that you have the ability to make your repayments via a level of security from the state.
Andrea, what's your view on that?
Just kind of, I agree with, he mentioned that for example, the auction-based scheme, biogas and biomethane cannot compete in prices in the auction with any solar and wind at the moment. So I agree, maybe something more specific is required.
Funnily enough, we entirely agree as well on that. The one thing that I think you have to flag up is that for solar and wind, the scale of the projects has been enormous, and therefore you've got big businesses that can prepare a tender bid properly and put their financial weight behind that tender bid. Now, most of the people building AD plants are not of that scale of business. They're not going to be able to, put a million or a couple of million into preparing a tender. So the CFDs, I think, if we're going to use that mechanism, which I think is a very good mechanism providing certainty, probably need to be administered prices, but they can crawl depending on the amount of demand. And that was what we used to do in the UK with the feed-in tariff. But I think there's some misunderstanding because people say, well, we can't handle doing a sort of Dutch auctions scheme with contracts for difference. Well, ironically, contracts for difference in this country started as a fixed price administered scheme administered by civil servants and then moved to the Dutch auction. I have to say I was responsible as the Secretary of State for moving it to the Dutch auction scheme because these companies were big enough to prepare the tender. AD is not in that situation, I think. Questions from the floor. I've got another one as well, which is you touched on it. I don't know, both you might both have a view. There's an ongoing bubbling debate in the UK about food versus fuel. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around that, given that you can use cover crops, given that if you are using food crops, they're actually animal feed crops. So the real choice, if you're making it in policy, is between feeding beef, which is a very inefficient way of creating protein, or alternatively using an energy crop. But is it an issue in Ireland, and how do you deal with it?
The food versus fuel discussion and debate is an issue for the broader bioenergy area, but not necessarily specific for the biogas, biomethane sector. It's thrown at us more in terms of liquid biofuels and that area. And it's thrown at us by people who mightn't necessarily be informed as to what's actually happening in those sectors in terms of the production of crop-based biofuels, when in fact their primary output is plant-based protein and plant-based fibre, and all they require is the sugar and the starches to produce the fuel, which as humans we probably don't need we've plenty of that anyways. It's plant-based protein and fibre that we require. So from a biomethane, biogas perspective, the food versus fuel discussion doesn't feature as strongly because the lobby is strongly anti-beef anyways. So the environmentalists are encouraging us, or would like to get us away from the livestock-based systems which we have in Ireland, which are our mainstay from our agricultural, so beef production and dairy production. So the food versus fuel discussion doesn't feature as strongly from the point of view of the biogas, biomethane sector, because it's, as you say, it's food for animals that we're displacing rather than food for human consumption.
Any questions from the floor? Yes, Josh.
Yeah, hi, Josh at Centrica. I was just hoping you could clarify the position on injecting biomethane to grid. My understanding was that previously you couldn't inject directly from the plant to the grid, but you talked there about injection points. So I just wondered if you could just clarify on what is possible from a sort of, I guess, regulatory perspective. Can they inject directly from the plant to the grid? And if not, presumably that's quite a big barrier.
So the current situation is that we have one operational injection point that's based at Cush in County Kildare. It's in the centre of the country, and that injection point is taking biomethane from a number of different locations or plants, which has been transported to the injection point and injected at that particular location. Gas Networks Ireland and Yvette would have spoken in her presentation about the proposal to build a centralised injection point at Mitchellstown in County Cork. So that's the additional injection point which is currently has gone through the planning process. I understand it's at the final stages of that process, and it is the intention of Gas Network Ireland to progress with that project. So what that will do is we'll take biomethane from a number of different sources and centrally inject at that particular location. My understanding is that Gas Networks Ireland has done this RFI process where they have asked developers to tell them where they're proposing to build biomethane facilities and biogas plants, and based on that it will inform potential future injection points that will be developed on the network to provide an opportunity for those biomethane biogas plants to provide biomethane to the grid. So currently we have another one planned, and the potential for others. There is also a direct injection option, so it depends on the scale of the facility. But I guess the best thing if you're interested in the injection point would be to engage with Gas Networks Ireland.
So, but basically at the moment it's hub and spoke model, but there is a possibility of doing direct injection, but you have to negotiate basically with the gas network, and nobody's done that yet.
It would be on the larger scales is my understanding, that you would have to negotiate them, but your plan would have to be large enough.
Yeah.
In terms of the direct injection, there may be discussions ongoing between certain plant developers and Gas Network Ireland, but we're not party to those discussions. They're not aware of those discussions, but there potentially could be discussions ongoing.
And I mean, is your experience of the hub and spoke model so far relatively successful? The costs are low enough to make it attractive for the developers?
The Cush facility is taking, as I understand it, biomethane from only 2 facilities. So there's plenty of opportunity potentially there, and opportunity at the other location. But the economics obviously depend on transport distances and other things, and ultimately depend on a market mechanism to make up the difference between fossil gas and the biomethane that's been injected in terms of the economics.
Thank you. Oh, we're nearing the end of the session, but if there are any other questions, yes.
Hi, how are you doing? I'm just curious to know what your take is on the licenses with the EPA and the permits, and it seems like none of them really talk to each other, so it's hard to kind of get an idea of exactly what is required permit-wise and licensing-wise. I just wanted to know what your take on that is.
We don't deal directly with the EPA from the point of view of the specifics of each of the permits and licenses, but we understand from members that it is a particular challenge for them to remain compliant with the requirements. I don't have direct experience, so I can't comment, but the feedback I'm getting is that some clarity needs to be brought to the permitting requirements, the administrative requirements and the processes to assist with if the industry mobilises, to assist with the rapid mobilisation of the sector, and that permitting and licensing doesn't become an impediment to the overall development of the sector.
Great. Well, I don't see any more questions. Thank you very much to our presenters for taking us through the opportunities in Ireland. I personally am totally convinced they're enormous, and it's going to be one of the fastest growing parts of the sector, but I'm pretty bullish about the sector overall, as you know, and I think that will continue to be the case. So thank you for coming, and I think you've got notes. I think the presentations are available on the website later, so you'll have access to Sean and Andrew's email addresses. I think we're on the end of the presentation if you wanted to get in touch. And thank you for coming. Thanks a lot.